I think that the focus up until the present time around this phenomenon has been largely upon, is this literally happening in our physical world in a way that scientists could prove through experiment, through replication? And that is, in my view, at this point, a secondary issue. It's an interesting issue. Scientists should work on it. We should continue perhaps to trap the aliens in the course of events. We should try to nail down the implants, whatever. But for me, the power of this phenomenon lies much more in the fact that these experiences are occurring to so many people in this country and throughout the world with such power among people who have no particular reason to be reporting such matters and for which we have no, quote, rational, unquote, which means what we're familiar with, explanation. It is a genuine mystery, and when you read titles like Consciousness Explained, this is an actual book with that title, you should become suspicious. Or when somebody says, well, I really know what this whole abduction thing in UFOs is really about. It's about images that we need to have of the millennium and blah, 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 blah. And you got to be very suspicious about that because, as Bobby says, any kind of theory, any explanation has to take in the whole fabric and richness of the phenomenon. Now, many of you are familiar with my kind of personal history around this, but I will emphasize a couple of aspects of it because I think they're relevant to anything that follows. Because I think, as we've heard, our own perception, our own worldview, our own frame of mind, our own ideology very much shapes what we can see, what we can take in, and how we interpret it. Now, you all know that I was dragged into this by Bud Hopkins, who is here tonight, and so I can say that in all truth, and he knows exactly how I feel. And when I first heard about him and about this phenomenon, as I think many of you know, I thought this was absurd. This must be some kind of craziness. And then when I went to meet with Bud, what is going on with the lights here? What? Yeah, there's something weird going on here with the lights. I don't know. It always happens when you talk. There we go. How long is it going to be like that? You know, oh boy, maybe this always happens when you deal with this subject. You know, energy, you get these fluky energy things. I'm not kidding. But I was impressed with Bud's sincerity, and the cases from the beginning seemed to me to be inexplicable. I mean, these people from all over the United States, now all over the world, talking about these stories with appropriate feeling. They hadn't gotten it from the media. The media follows the experiences, not the other way around. They had nothing to gain by this, and as you now know, everything to lose. And it just seemed to me extraordinarily interesting. And when people would ask me after this when I got interested, well, why are you interested in this matter? Why are you doing this? I would say, why are you not interested in this? What could be more interesting than the possibility that we are being visited by some kind of other beings from we know not where who are entering into our lives? Now, what I didn't realize was there are two responses to that. One is it isn't happening anyway. And the other, well, that's the main response, actually, when I think about it. It all boils down to that. Or, if it is happening, I don't want to know about it, you know. So I've been very naive about how all this would be received, although I think it's more and more becoming more considered in the culture at large. I want to just emphasize the dilemma that one who works in this field faces. Certainly I faced it, I'm sure Bud has faced it, and others. You're confronted with people, you work as a clinician, and that's my work. And this is a kind of litany with me. The years keep going up. It started 40 years as a clinician, now it's 45 years as a clinician. Everything I know from doing that kind of work tells me that what I'm hearing from these individuals, I'm hearing and they are talking in the way that people talk about something that has happened to them. They don't talk about it like people talk about delusions, fantasies, dreams, other kinds of trauma, organic brain, you name it. They talk about it like it happened to them. Now, the problem, as you know, is that according to our worldview, this can't happen. It's not possible. We don't have a place in our worldview for beings, energy, entities coming from the other dimension and crossing over and showing up in our reality. We've spent hundreds of years building up a worldview that says that's not possible. So the culture goes through an ontological shock, or would if it had to acknowledge that, yes, indeed, that crossover is possible and is happening. Now, the dilemma that someone like me, or Bud, I'm sure, has faced this, and others who do this work face, is you have a choice at that point. You either try to force it into the worldview. You sort of search, there was an article in one of our leading newspapers recently where it was said, abduction phenomena explained by scientists, it's sleep paralysis. Well, everybody can heave a sigh of relief. Well, the people are often not asleep and then often not paralyzed and on and on and on. But, anything but is what anything but theory. So you're faced with, you try to force it into some category, it won't go. But a lot of people do that anyway, and then they go away from it. Or you stop and you say, the world may be a different place than the one I thought it was, or the one I was brought up to think it was. There may be intelligences out there that are smart and have. My own direction on this was to, because I just was confronted with case after case after case that was consistent, that I felt there was really for me no choice but to try to change my worldview and to think maybe our notions of reality were incomplete. And that is where all the trouble has come from for me. But maybe if I'd known all the trouble I would get, maybe I wouldn't have done it. So it's probably just as well to be naive in certain ways. Now, I'm going to emphasize some of the elements that this overlaps with what Bobby said, but I'm going to emphasize some aspects of the phenomenon that may not get the attention that they need. Now, I think when Bud and I talk about this, we agree on the fundamental fact that something extraordinary is happening, that we are being visited, that this is going on, that it's real in some profound way. We disagree on some of the details and some of the interpretations, but there's no question in my mind that this phenomenon is real. Now, we can deconstruct the word real, we can say, what do we mean by real? Do we mean experientially real or physically real? And go on with the philosophy of it, but it's real, okay? You can decide, we can all decide in how it's real. Bobby talked some about the physical aspect, but I think it needs to be underscored. The physical nature of the experience. This is not just something that occurs in the head or in the feelings. This is a powerful physical experience that involves every cell in the body of these individuals. There are marks on their bodies that are left consistently that Bud and others have discovered. And these marks have a consistent pattern. They may be in symmetrical, roseate kind of lesions, or they may be in triangular shaped, or they may be implants left, which have never been proven to be extraterrestrial, but there's still little things there that the experiencers believe they can be monitored through. None of those have been proven to have any special qualities, but there's still something has happened there that can't be dismissed. And I could go on about, now I don't present the physical lesions, I don't, because I'm in the medical profession, and the dermatologist would have me for lunch if I did that, because they would say, well, you can't prove that an alien did that, it might have been mosquitoes or self-inflicted or whatever, and what could I say? It's not robust enough to satisfy the general medicine criteria, but it's real nevertheless. Then another thing that needs to be emphasized, which is related to that, are the light and energy phenomena related to this. Now, you see about beams of light. UFOs are surrounded with light. People are taken by this brilliant light, sometimes through a wall, or there's energy in that light. But light is a consistent, powerful light, which has both the physical and spiritual quality as part of this experience. And in association with that light is the experience of some kind of extraordinary energy. And I really don't know how to talk about this, because if you use the word subtle, it's not really so subtle, but it's very powerful, it's very real. And yet it's not necessarily energy like, going through wires or electromagnetic energy or any of the energies that we are really familiar with. So we don't know what this energy is, but it's very real. And people will say, when they relive this, I watch on the couch, their whole body will literally shake from the power of the reliving of what's in their tissues from these experiences. Fantasy doesn't usually work like that. And so that piece of it has to be looked at and considered. Now, that energy also is related to the experience of transformation that we'll be talking about in a bit. They will say, somehow that vibration from them occurs at a higher frequency, and then my body or my mind or myself begins to vibrate at a higher frequency, and that higher frequency is related to the opening to spirit, to source, to the connectedness that in the cosmos. That energy is also connected with information. Notice that Bobby referred to the ecological aspect of this, the sense that there's something going on with the environment. But that energy, information comes in, skills people feel they have gotten, psychic abilities that they feel they've received through that energy. Also, that energy seems to contain great healing powers. Many people who have these experiences go into the healing professions afterwards. They leave their accountant jobs or being computer programmers or whatever they're doing, and they go into the healing professions because they sense that they have some capacity. Not only that we need healing, but they have something through that energy, through their hands, through themselves, that they've gotten through these experiences that gives them healing power. And that needs a lot more study. Now we're getting to I think one of the most controversial aspects of this, which is the hybrid, so-called hybrid program, which Bud and Dave Jacobs particularly recently has written about a lot, and this creation of a species of hybrid beings between the connection of the aliens with the humans, sometimes sexual, sometimes purely vibratory, but a connection. Now, we don't know what the ontological status of those hybrids are, nor do we know the ontological, that is the reality status, the beingness of this. We don't know in what reality is, but particularly it's important in the case of the hybrids because of the interpretive element. In other words, are these beings literally physical hybrids? So if you could somehow crack into a UFO, you'd see little hybrids running around with sort of look somewhat like us and somewhat like them. Or is this in some in-between state of reality, not sort of other dimension, non-corporeal, and not literally material like us, but in some in-between status? I don't know. But it matters, because if you think of it as entirely literally real, that there are all these hybrids, then it can follow, as some have interpreted, that those hybrids, there's so many of them, they're going to take over the earth, and that we're going to be colonized by all these hybrids, or whatever. They're getting prepared for the next sort of kind of space takeover. Or another interpretation about the hybrids, and this people get, is that it's to preserve some sort of life, our life, the Earth's life, what's essential of us and essential of them, which can survive the ecological catastrophe. So it's often related to what's happening to the environment. In other words, it's an insurance policy, as one abductee says. So there can be some life after this juggernaut of planetary destruction that that is being wrought on the planet by this one species has created such a situation that life is impossible. I don't know, but the hybrid phenomenon program is definitely in some way very real and very important. Now, the ecological information, threat that comes through the eyes, that comes through telepathically, that comes from television-like monitors in the ships, this is, in my experience, a central part of the phenomena. The experiences are shown that there is a web of life, a fragility of the planet. Now, these are not people that had any particular interest in the environment or ecology. They might be, people that would have been just as happy to go ahead and discard things, create pollution, whatever. I mean, not particularly bad or good, just not specially interested in these environmental matters. But they become acutely aware sometimes of that web of life and of our connection with the planet. They feel viscerally in their bodies that connection with the earth and what we are doing to the earth. And sometimes they will weep in agony over that destructiveness. And if they are supported and are empowered in a sense to speak about this, they can become very effective in talking about that. One of the experiences has become, Susan, who's in the book, has become a leading environmental teacher in the school system in her region of Massachusetts, done many other projects along those lines. At the Ariel School in Zimbabwe, where 60 children saw one or more UFOs landing, and I don't know if any of the children were abducted because we didn't really explore it that deeply with any single individual kid, but many of the kids, when asked what they were learning or what the beings told them, they said that the eyes told them that we're not taking proper care of the planet. That's what they learned through the eyes. And I would ask them, well, did you get taught that in school, or did you think about that? When did you start to think about that? And they say, when I had that experience. Another dimension of this is that people will often change the way they think, the way they see the world, from a literal, linear, logical, factual kind of way of looking at things, which predominates in our culture, to a way that is similar to what the way native people think. The world becomes a world of symbol and interconnection, of archetypes of birth and death. They may actually come up with creation myths of their own. They resonate with native experience. Or the animals, which are often the way that alien beings are disguised, in other cultures they also see that, but they see that in relation to animal spirits and animal powers that are part of that culture's knowledge. And a lot more could be said about that. They often will say they are drawn to native people, and often experiences come to know them. And many native people have come to me because they wanted to help me. They saw what I was doing, and they, sort of like, this guy, this academician, this white guy, he found out this stuff. We got to help him. He's all by himself with this, or more or less, a few of us. And so the number of them have come forward and have been very supportive because as Sequoia Trueblood, who's in my book, when I asked him how many of the shamans that he said he knew, is spoken with 100 or 150 shamans, know this phenomenon, he said all of them. They've all had these experiences, including himself. Then I want to say a word about the traumatic aspect of this. Bobby touched on this, because it's very important. I don't mean in any way to shortchange the traumatic dimension when I look at the spiritual power of this. It is traumatic for the reasons Bobby said, to have your space invaded, to be taken, to be poked, to have your reality shattered is traumatic. People do suffer from these experiences. But at the same time, when they move through that terror, through that, as they will describe it, as like the dark night of the soul, there is an opening. Something happens that is powerfully transformative and leads to intense growth. When Whitley Strieber went to his Gurdjieff teacher that he'd been meditating with and told about the terror and what he'd gone through with these beings, his teacher said to him, "Oh, you're so lucky." He said, 15 seconds with those beings, 15 years of this kind of meditation. So it's the fast track, if you like, of trauma and transformation, or one of them. And as you've heard, once this opening has occurred, the beings sometimes get to be seen as emissaries from the source, they will speak, or messengers from God or the divine, or whatever we call that primary creative principle in the universe. And when they open to that source and feel that connection, which they often have had hints of all their lives, living here becomes extremely painful. They don't want to be here. Life here is a drag. It's cruel, it's mean, it's harsh. It doesn't have the divinity, it doesn't have the purity, it doesn't have that luminescence to it. Here's one of the people who's here this evening, Will, who described it this way. When you're in the presence of that source connection, there is nothing like it. There is nothing you can conceive of that isn't understood. There is nothing that can't be done. It is a love that cannot be contained, and you know then why I get so angry that I have to be back here. Now, we wrestle with experiences a lot because they are here, and they don't necessarily threaten suicide, but they don't want to be here. And then we get into these discussions, philosophical discussions, can you contribute? But it's a battle because they long to be returned back to that creative principle or source. And finally, there's a dimension which I'm becoming increasingly interested in, which has to do with relationships. And this relates to those huge dark eyes. Those eyes can be terrifying, engulfing. They seem to know everything, sometimes the experiencers will say. But also, after they get past this early period in which they will say they're just looked at like they were specimens and they're just being used for this sort of cold process of taking sperm or taking eggs, sometimes some very, very deep bond forms. Now, this could be interpreted as identification with the aggressor, as occurs in the so-called Stockholm Syndrome, where captives come to love their captors. I don't know, but it seems to have something more than that. Some very deep, intense emotional connection occurs with one or more of these beings, which has a both spiritual and sometimes erotic element, which is extremely intense, and which they will say is many times more powerful than any connection they experienced on Earth, as if crossing that interdimensional divide that occurs here somehow brings some sort of transcendent power to the creature connection that occurs here. And that often takes place around, that's the being sometimes that they will have had hybrid children with. And there's a whole element to this hybrid thing which has to do with parenting. The hybrids often seem to be frail and weak and not surviving very well. And the aliens seem to have discovered that, well, the human part of these beings at least needs parenting. That's the way we are. And they're very crude and awkward in discovering these things that should be obvious to all of us, which lends us, again, these crude, awkward things often lend a little strange reality to it. One of the experiencers, a scientist herself, very good observer, they tried to give, and again, I don't know if this is literally true, but they tried to give her a bottle, showed her to give a bottle to the baby because she couldn't nurse the baby. So then the rubber didn't have any hole in it. So she said, I can't give it to the baby. So they took a scissor, they cut the thing off, and all the milk just poured all over the place. I mean, and again, whether that literally happened or not, I don't know. But for her, it was a very powerful and real and rather touching moment. As you heard on the tape, this experience can be so powerful, these relationships so powerful, that they can be a threat to the marriage. And Whitley, in the book, and others have talked this way, he said, well, my wife and I, we appreciate what we have here on Earth, and we split in that other relationship, that's in another dimension, and that's okay. Tolerated better than two relationships in this dimension. But it's, as long as it's in the other dimension, it seems to be, sometimes okay. there's a curious poignancy. The aliens seem fascinated with our physicality, our sensuality, our sexuality. It's as if they long for a body. They want that they miss that. At the same time, this kind of non-egoic existence, this sort of understanding of the interconnected web of all life is something that they teach us. So there's a kind of exchange program of a sort, spiritually, of that nature. Another thing about this, and this is, I haven't done much work with this, but there seems to be something in the way of the effect that these relationships have on human relationships. So there's something that about an expectation or a demand of human relationships that they have a pureness or a kind of honesty or a non-aggressive quality or some kind of connectedness. There's a lack of tolerance that many experiences feel for the sort of cheap shots that we live in everyday interconnection. It has to be different than that. And so something emerges there for relationships on this plane. So I'll conclude with just a few sort of summary observations here, and then we'll hear from Andrea. I see this as a kind of awakening for every man, this phenomenon. But in the terms of our culture, it's a kind of reaching to us from this other dimension, from the beyond. I sometimes kiddingly say it's an outreach program from the cosmos to the consciously impaired. It's now, this notion, as I mentioned earlier, of crossover is itself shattering, so that there's a double thing here. The crossover is in itself powerful in the sense that it reaches us with all of what we've been talking about, but the fact of crossover is also shattering of our consciousness. Now, you hear a lot these days about changing paradigms or changing worldviews. I was at two conferences, one in India where a group of us met with the Dalai Lama, and we were looking at what is this new paradigm from the perspective of multiple fields, different fields, and also at the State of the World Forum in San Francisco, the new paradigm was the phrase of the day. Everybody was looking at it, but what does it mean exactly? And I'll just give one angle on that for me. Because I think most of the problems we face on the planet now can relate to the inadequacy of the dominant paradigm, which says something like we are alone in a lifeless universe unless we find radio waves coming here. The planet basically is a marketplace for us. The material world is all there is. There is no tangible spiritual world, although people may have spiritual experiences. And the divinity, the notion of divinity is a psychological phenomenon, but it's not really about anything. There's a theologian, Houston Smith, that reviewed the schools of religion, divinity schools around the country and what they were teaching. And he noted that they were teaching about comparative religion, about the history of religion in different countries, about what different peoples believed. But Houston Smith remarked at the end of the article, none of these schools ever say this is about anything. In other words, there is no other realm, no divinity that they teach about that exists. It's simply how other various people look at it from somewhat of a distance. Now, at this State of the World Forum, Richard Tarnas, a philosopher and psychologist, spoke about how Western man in the last several centuries has voided the universe of all other intelligence as an active process in order for the masculine human to achieve its project of gaining dominion over the physical world, what Sequoia says, what the white man has done, the people of the straight line, that's the way we're described, as opposed to the people of the circle who have always lived in the native people who have lived in this interconnected web. Now, but this voiding of the universe has left human beings with this deep state of grief, that something's missing, something is wrong, something is left out that is of fundamental importance. Now, what I think this phenomenon at its root, and there are many others that are doing this, anomalies, if you will, near-death experiences, other intrusions from the other realm that are opening consciousness. I think what this is all about is a kind of sort of heart opening, a kind of desperate crisis of heart opening, if you will, of a re-ensoulment of the disensouled cosmos, of a reconnection with Source that is occurring among many people. And that out of this, the earth once again becomes sacred. And so this treating of the earth, treating of one another in this destructive, annihilating way becomes impossible because the other becomes sacred. You become identified with it. It is an extension of yourself, and therefore the way we treat the planet just becomes impossible. And then from that, it follows that the primary task that experiencers will talk about, in which I think they communicate to us, is that our primary responsibility at this point is the stewardship of the earth, is the caretaking of this planet, of this home, because this is what someone said in a book, this is the planet of choice. And as Thomas Berry, the radical Catholic theologian, said, as far as we know, as far as we have evidence in the cosmos, this planet is the finest creation of the divine. Thank you very much.